instead of finding a divine resolution to the problem, it finds an imminent one. Namely, it identifies a particular group, currently the white heterosexual male, though I think that will certainly move to, I think, white women and probably black heterosexual males after that. It identifies a group that if they can be scapegoated, then the sins of the world will be taken away. So if you look at every major project of the Democratic Party, it's against the nation state that the white man had a hand in. It's against capitalism that the white man had a hand in. Basically everything, every actionable item in the Democratic Party today is an attack on the things that the white man hath wrought. So the idea here is that politics is about scapegoating a particular group. Now, within Christianity, you have the idea that there's a divine gift that breaks in. And so mercy is at the heart of Christianity. But what identity politics does is it denies mercy, denies forgiveness. There are only the irredeemables and the deplorables. And so there's no room whatsoever for charity and for forgiveness. It's a world without gifts.
A world without gifts. For the Giving Review, this would be a challenge, if not an opportunity. But so what you in the book talk about Tocqueville, I'm going to quote your book to you, and you cite his insight that, quote, when the institutions of society no longer can or do address issues that are proper to them, those issues will be elevated to the political level. That's the end of the quote. Is that happening to the charitable sector in general as well, that it's becoming politicized, or is politics supplanting charity? And if so, is that a good or bad thing?
I would modify it slightly. Tocqueville thought that the way in which democracy can be redeemed is if we have these vibrant mediating institutions, family, churches. And in the book and elsewhere, I argue that it's in those institutions that we learn the proper relationship between justice and mercy, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in a little bit. And if those institutions falter, then we're not going to understand the proper relationship between justice and mercy. And I think one way of looking at identity politics, it's a reflection of the failure of the institutions in which we should learn those things. And so you've got people on the left now who embrace identity politics who will talk about a new Green Deal that's going to cost, what, 20, 30, 40, 50 trillion dollars. Somehow they've completely lost sight of what I call the world of payment, which is the world of justice. And we have to live in the world of payment. And I think conservatives through the Reagan era were quite good at talking about the world of payment, but in fairness, they didn't think closely enough about the relationship between the world of payment and the world of mercy. And I think what you have, one way of looking at this, identity politics, is it's a revenge of mercy against the world of payment. And so for a while we emphasized one aspect, now we're emphasizing the aspect of mercy. So a borderless world, for example, national borders can be understood, the crisis of national borders can be understood in terms of this relationship between justice and mercy. So the world of justice is, we're a nation that has laws. And if you want to come here legally, that is great. And in fact, there are these things called, these groups of people called illegal immigrants. They are illegal. We have the rule of law, which establishes the boundaries of nations. And on the other hand, mercy should supplant or supplement the world of justice. And so any decent nation, any capital L liberal nation, will have opportunities for people who have been hounded by their governments. We can make the decisions as to who comes in, but any decent nation will have mercy as a supplement to justice. But what's happened on the left is that they want to completely get rid of the world of justice, the world of payment, the world of the father, the patriarchal world who establishes boundaries, and simply have a world of mercy. And it's dreamy, it's absolutely dreamy. And we have to get the right relationship between justice and mercy back. And so we have to have a world of payment, but charity must always be a supplement to that world of payment. Capitalism does not work without the supplement of charity. And I think conservatives have really lost sight of this. We focused on the world of payment, free markets. That's very, very important. But there must be a supplement to this. And I don't think we emphasized that enough. Now, I know the Bradley Foundation did, and you guys did in your work. But as a whole, the conservative movement was talking about free markets the whole time and didn't talk about the supplementary function of charity. So we have to get this relationship right. And if we are unable to do it, if we're unable to learn these things in their proper venue, which is the family and the churches, then we're going to have deeply distorted understandings of these things.
Josh, since we're on identity politics and religion and justice and mercy, there are three publications that come to my mind. The first, with your closing remarks here and your answer to this question, Dan Mahoney's book on the Icon of the Age, where he talks about at great length, as you know, on justice and mercy. But more primarily, I was thinking of one, I guess, secular, Cult of Supreme Being from French Revolution days, this kind of publication by Darren Walker, Generosity to Justice, arguing that philanthropy should be pursuing social justice, not just mere charity. And I guess along with that, someone who is in the theological, although some critics will talk about sort of neo-theology, the Pope's recent encyclical, Fratelli, where he talks about, in a way, even talks about politics as a sort of lofty vocation, one of the highest forms of charity. So I wonder, with those sort of introductory remarks and references to those three, I'm in particular interest in sort of the Pope's, given what you just said about justice and mercy, how you sort of regarded that approach that he took in that particular document that was a result of group study over some period of time.
Yeah, I don't know that I can speak to the Pope's most recent claims, but the Walker claim is to me very troubling, because politics, I'm a good liberal, capital L liberal. Politics is about interest. I'm a Madisonian in this respect. But there must be something that supplements politics, and that's the world of charity. But social justice is a political project. It's a project of establishing who owes who what. And this is the essence of identity politics. The purpose is not to accomplish things. The purpose is to call out groups and establish your debt and innocence points. And so to move philanthropy to social justice is to completely misunderstand the relationship between the world of payment and the world of gifts. Charity pertains to the world of gifts, right? And what social justice is trying to do is to say there are no gifts. In a strange way, it's like Marx. If you look at Marx, his fundamental claim about capitalism was that it was only a world of payment. Everything was reduced to money. And this is where I think Tocqueville is superior, because Tocqueville realizes that, yes, the Americans are really focused on money, but charity is something that moves beyond the world of payment. And social justice is not about charity. It's not about the gift. It's about getting even. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. Equity is not about equality. It's about vengeance. It's about getting even. It's about establishing who owes who what. And my concern is that we're losing sight of the fundamental liberal understanding, which is that we are to build a world together. And America is a remarkable country. We have all these different people. We've got the legacy of slavery, which we have to continue to wrestle with, to be sure. But the only way we're going to do it, on Tocqueville's estimation, and here I think Tocqueville is right, is if we're able to greet each other and recognize that we have to build a world together. And it's only when you have a state that has become so strong that we can dream that we don't need one another to build a world together, that we can have identity politics. Because the precondition of identity politics is you recognize me for who I am. That's how we start. Whereas for a liberal, you don't know who you are really. You don't know who the other person is really. And you work that out through face-to-face associations. This is what I think Tocqueville got fundamentally right. So the idea that we can understand who we are and who we can understand who the other person is I think is a faulty reading of what Tocqueville had in mind. Identity is something it's declarative, and it's a strategy of resistance. And Tocqueville's view was we had to build a world together in the various institutions where we meet face to face.
If Mike will allow me, can I just ask a quick follow-up question so we can keep ourselves going here? This has to do with sort of Americans' understanding of what took place between 1917 and 1989, 91 with respect to that part of the world. Have we taken for granted the issue or the matter of trust, the importance of trust? And consequently, with years passing, and the sort of battle back and forth about who's our enemy and who's not, that we developed a sort of cartoonish understanding of what that situation was like, and hence a depreciation of the issue of trust and how it relates to, as you talk about competence in the book, versus this question of identity.
Yeah. So in one passage that very few people read in Democracy in America, Tocqueville says, as soon as matters are treated in common, we realize that our neighbor is not quite as demonic as we thought. And he doesn't use the word demonic, but his argument is the only way you can build trust is if you have to build a world together. And he worried that the self would become more and more isolated. And while people don't recognize this, he was very worried about the human imagination. If we are locked inside our own selves, this is the problem of selfie man. This is why I give a lecture called Facebook is Death. I mean, this is really deeply destructive. If we're locked within ourselves and have no occasions where we absolutely must work with people who are different from ourselves, then we can develop heightened and demonic understandings of who the other person is. And we don't develop trust at all, because the slightest difference is seen as a precondition for us not to work together. Tocqueville says in one place, a tyrant will forgive citizens for not loving him, provided they do not love each other. In other words, the best way to have a powerful state at the end of history is to have people be completely distrustful of one another. You cannot have a vibrant democracy without trust. But when you start with identity, you don't start with trust, you start with distrust. You start with the recognition of differences which are insurmountable. You start with wounds that happened in the past that can never be repaid. You cannot build a liberal world of competence on this model.
Thank you.
So do we have identity philanthropy in America right now?
Social justice is identity politics philanthropy. So in my town of Chestertown, we have it's a small town, Chestertown, Maryland, where Washington College resides. And on the main street, a huge Black Lives Matter sign. And I have to ask the question, so what's really going on here? And what's happening both in the world of philanthropy and the world of business is what I call a kind of secularized Passover ritual in the book. So in Egypt, the Jews have to put a mark of innocence on their lintel in order for death to pass over. And I argue that everywhere in America, be it in philanthropic organizations or corporations or universities, guilty parties, i.e. whites, have to give some indication, they have to paint some sign of innocence on their door so that social death will pass over. And so you have philanthropy organizations giving money to Black Lives Matter. You have in college campuses, university professors who have the latest poster of Martin Luther King Day. This office is green, as I say in the book. I mean, you're not building a world together here. We're really at a remarkable point in American history where the sole purpose of human action seems to be to cover yourself with the mantle of innocence. And Black Lives Matter gives white people the sense that now their sins are forgiven if they just endorse this or that project. And I think young people especially are this way. They're young white people, they're kids, they're haunted by an identity that indicates that they're poison. And so they have to declare that climate change is harming them. They're victims of climate change. I also think, and this is somewhat more controversial, I don't think I say this in the book, but I'll say it here. I do think that some aspect of the transgender movement can be understood in this way too. So to be a heteronormative white person or a heteronormative person at all is now a thought crime. And so you have in high schools, young people walking around saying to themselves, well, today on the gender scale of 1 to 6, I'm a 2 or I'm a 3, somewhere between a man and a woman, or maleness or non-maleness. And these young kids, they have to desperately look for cover. And so the way they do it is they talk about the sins of climate change harming them, the sins of capitalism harming them, the sins of heteronormativity hiding them. It's a whole generation that has been taught one thing. The only way that you can survive and thrive is to have social death pass you by. And we call it cancel culture, but I think we really need to see what this is. We have to get back to the Christian terminology here. It's scapegoating. This is what it is. And the revolutionary Christian claim was there is a divine scapegoat, not a mortal scapegoat. This is what the doctrine of original sin really means. And yes, Protestants and Catholics disagree, but they still understand that there had to be a divine gift because of man's brokenness. And he couldn't look to another group of people to purge himself of his own brokenness. The divine gift had to break in. Catholics and Protestants agree on that, even if they disagree on the extent of it. So that's the revolutionary insight. But what's happened today is we've lost sight of half of Christianity. We've lost sight of the divine gift, but we've not lost sight of the guilt part. And so we've returned to a pagan way of resolving this problem. And that is to find some group out there that you're going to scapegoat. And if you can just kill them off and purge their toxicity, toxic masculinity here, enter that term, or invoke that term here. If we can just do that, then we can be pure. But the Christian insight is you can't be pure. There's something wrong that only God's gift can solve for you. And this is why I say this is deeper than a political problem. Ultimately, this is a theological crisis that the churches must address. And yet they're the worst offenders here, desperately putting up Black Lives Matter posters, putting up the transgender rainbow colors, everybody is welcome here, because they're desperately trying to cover themselves with innocence. They've lost their own great insight, which is that Christ is the one who covers over the world of its darkness, and scapegoating another group is not going to do it.
You know, it's interesting, in a way, the argument or the conversation over many centuries about the witnessing somehow to God's providence's intersection with human life on this earth, the pandemic in a way, in a sort of metaphorical way with lockdowns. I think as you're describing this situation, it's a sort of interesting metaphor. And I'll mention just in the case of Russia, for example, it got a little reported here. Again, only certain things come out and you only have a certain amount of space. But there are a number of monks who ended up refusing, because it was during Lent that the pandemic was very virulent and still is to a certain extent in Russia. They said they had to do their services for the people. Yeah. That there was something higher. And so maybe you noted this as well. And it wasn't the only place, but it certainly was dramatic. And many of them, some even killed themselves because they got sick and they didn't want to give up their holy order, if you will, of doing the sacramental duty especially during Lent. So I find those remarks you just made as a very interesting in terms of the theological depth of this issue.
Well, this is what troubles me a great deal. I don't have an easy answer for it because I'm not advocating recklessness. But the Eucharist is not something you take over a TV screen. You don't have a remote church service and have remote Eucharist. I mean, if the divine is made present in the Eucharist, then it's literally the bread of life. And this is the question we have to answer. Where really is life? And I do not advocate recklessness, but on the other hand, we're really involved in a huge battle about whether human life can be reduced to its mere material conditions, i.e. we're merely biological creatures that do or do not carry viruses. This is a very dangerous road to go down, and when we are going down it, and it happens just very quickly. It happens even in the most insidious of ways. So I go to the Smithsonian Institute, and there's an exhibit in which a human being has been cross-sectioned into 1,000 different parts. And this is right there in the center of the room. People walk by it and they think to themselves, oh, this is what a human being is. Well, no, that's not what a human being is. There's thousands of ways in which we're told that the only thing that matters is our biological existence. And if that's the case, as I say to my students, then liberty doesn't matter. It's because we're more than material creatures that liberty matters. And I think Tocqueville saw this very, very clearly. And the pandemic is alerting us to this great question. Are we merely material creatures? And if we are, then we should have lockdowns. And by the way, this is the beginning of a whole new stage of history, because pandemics come out every 5 or 10 years. And this means constant money printing. It means the devaluation of the dollar. It probably means universal basic income. It probably means modern monetary theory. I mean, it's a whole new world out there that we're entering into if we say that we're simply biological creatures.
Why don't we finish up with part one there and get to part two next.